Greetings and welcome back, everyone, to our overview of Demetra George's second volume book of Ancient Astrology. This is a companion series to our study book club that we do over on Patreon, so you can find us there. I'm astrologer Elsa Wadsworth, and I'm joined again today by astrologers Matt Nolan from the Astrologers Encyclopedia here on YouTube and from _Astropedia over on Twitter. Thanks for being here, Matt.
Hello.
And along with astrologer David Fisher, of course, again, from In the First Place Astrology here on YouTube and David Fisher over on Instagram.
Hello.
All right, y'all. So we are, of course, all practicing astrologers, so feel free to reach out. And just a little bit of a reminder for everyone before we get started, or actually, at first, I'd like to just thank everyone for getting our channel to 500 subscribers. I think it was $4.99 last night, so it should be 500 by this time this is posted. So thank you all. It's a milestone for us. A little milestone, but hey, we're celebrating them all. Let's get to 1,000 in Gemini season, shall we? Just skyrocket. And then reminding everyone who's followed our channel from the Decanic series that David and I did with astrologer KB Dayton. I am doing a Decanic story series over on Instagram, and that's live right now as we go through the decans. So just reminding you that that's happening. And shout out to everyone at NORWAC because we are recording during the weekend of NORWAC, and I'm sure it's a exciting eminence coming from that space. So here we are at the last chapter of part 8. So the parts go according to volume 1 and volume 2. So now in volume 2, we are at part 8, which is chapter 85. So this chapter covers integration. So, concluding this whole part, we're going to go over a little bit more meticulously with the book today. I'm going to read a few paragraphs from the first page to kind of intro us. I love what Demetra did here. But in this integration, we're looking at bringing the planet and the house approaches together. So now this will cover a bunch of what we've done in the last few videos and kind of bringing it all around to the integration point today. You guys have additives before we open?
I like the little summary that she gives in the video, just to add a little personal thought to it, because it's barely mentioned nowadays because people don't know much about it. I myself am not an expert. I just know what I've learned through studying this material in depth. She touches on the philosophy or the understanding, the cosmology rather, of the ancients and how it is the base for everything that we touched upon in the previous chapters. And I think that this one start of this chapter is a very good summary of the idea behind everything that we've been discussing. It's a beautifully put. Say.
Exactly. I agree.
And I think something that whenever I read this always sticks out to me, because I always need the reminder, is that to go very, very slowly and start from things that are simple and don't try to get needlessly complicated with things before you understand how each piece sort of fits together. And so both books, but I really think part 2 in particular, and this section in particular, does a great job of saying, this is a list of steps that you can take to get a really good delineation every single time. And it's not really, it's not dead and formulaic, but it's also not this really free flowing thing. There's a set of steps that you can follow and get something good every time.
Absolutely. I feel like this chapter is paramount. I feel like if you are a budding or new astrologer or even a more experienced astrologer, this chapter, we're not going to go over everything in today's video. Again, this is an overview and we're going to go over it more in the study group where, people have the opportunity to quote unquote do the homework and really work the steps. But it's so complete, on how to integrate and how to think about it and really moving us through piece by piece. She does a fantastic job with this chapter.
And I think, mainly the thing that it avoids is really vague like cliched, stereotypical interpretations, and it lets you get things that are very, very specific. David, that light is beautiful.
You become an angel.
But yeah, that's what I always try to keep in mind when I'm reading this. And in the group, we really stress that, like when we work through the examples, going like really one step at a time, going like a lot slower than your mind really wants to a lot of times, because it can be really kind of like ego satisfying to be able to be, you know, pulling on all these different things, when really like the best result you're going to get is from these basics.
Absolutely. And it's not even that basic when you think about, like, up until now, we've had to like restrain ourselves and pull ourselves back. And now at this point, if you haven't restrained yourself and pulled yourself back, you will be overwhelmed with this chapter, because it's so many sort of layers to get to an ultimate understanding. And so, I mean, I think I'll touch on how Demetra says it like towards the end of the video, because I remember highlighting it, but it's really about like working the filters, working the system of filters in order to come up with this very sacred and specific medicine, or like working the program, shall we say, in order to allow an oracular space to occur.
Yes,
you know?
yes, that's a great way to put it.
And again, a way to put it is like Robert Schmidt likes to put it in terms of language. He has paradigms in terms of grammar, and for instance, language allows us to transmit ideas to people, and we integrate language from a very early age. It's one of the first things as humans that we learn. We learn language many times even before we learn how to walk properly. We learn how to speak. So it's very important for us to have this ability to integrate different kinds of language, because they're merely ways to transmit ideas, but also to allow you to think about things. Astrology, like language, is a way to allow you to think about things. You structure a thought in order to contemplate it more clearly. Astrology is the same for the astrologer, and this is one of the things that Demetra goes into in this book, in this chapter.
That being said, let me just dive into it, and I'll read some excerpts from the first couple paragraphs. So, reading from Demetra, Plato speculated that the planets are the visible manifestations of the gods. From a metaphysical or archetypal perspective, the planets represent the primary centers of consciousness within the human psyche that drive the personality towards self-realization. So in the particulars, as far as the astrological nativity goes, each planetary god is in charge of bringing forth its own significations that fall under its dominion. And in addition, this planetary god is responsible for the other planetary gods and house topics, i.e., human life, that occupies these estates. So it must be the use of these activities of the house in which it resides in order to fulfill the agenda that may receive some of the assistance from its own domicile lord. With this compounded profile, the planetary god impacts and determines the outcome of the topics of the house or the temple in which it's taken up residence as a guest. So as above, so below, humans resonate in accordance with the movements of the planetary gods who live inside of them as centers of consciousness. So as astrologers, we mediate between the planetary gods and the mortals, attempting to convey the celestial blueprint for each life as it's been ordained by the stars at the moment of birth. In an ideal scenario, the client consults the astrologer for advice on how to best live their life in accordance with the divine intention in order to participate in the realization of their own spark of divinity. Demetra, lays it down.
and the video right there.
Yeah, I mean,
that's good enough.
So I feel like this just brings in the beauty here. So it's this system, but this is how we're feeling the system. This is how the system is acting upon us. This is how it's a living system. This is, it's a big philosophical kind of like underpinning to what we're doing here. So I just really wanted to include that. And thank you, Demetra, for being so eloquent. Now on to matters of business. We're going to take this summary and go through this outline here to kind of give you the steps or kind of a review as to what we're doing when we're integrating these techniques. So we're going to go a little bit step by step, and a lot of these steps that we're outlining now are elaborated on in previous videos. So if we outline one of the steps and you want a little bit of more depth about it, you can find a video all about it in the previous part of the chapter series. So are you guys ready to dive into this part? Mm-hmm. Awesome. So the summary, so we have number 1, we're going to evaluate the nature and the condition of the house. So this is a house focus.
And so, you know, we're starting here with the part of the chart that is sort of closest to Earth, right? So the houses have to do with the spinning of the Earth each day. And we can evaluate houses, she says, by means of angularity, favorability, and witnessing by benefic and malefic planets. So we know that there are good and bad houses. So the first house and the 10th are the 2 best, the 6th and the 12th are the 2 worst. And so barring any other factors, a planet or just, you know, the first house is going to produce better outcomes than the 12th. But that can be modified by, let's say we have a trine from Jupiter to the 12th, we can see better 12th house outcomes. And I think that's basically what she's saying here.
Yeah. And then she does talk about, like, yeah, witnessing and planetary rays and all that, which would be kind of what you're talking about with how it's determined, how it's being influenced, and how we're going about that final determination.
And so maybe like one quick, you know, example would be like, let's say we want to look at someone's financial state throughout life. We look at the second house. This is one way. We're going to look at basically 5 others. And we can say, okay, if this person has a square from Jupiter from above to the 12th or to the second, then that is an sort of a sign for better financial fortunes, rather than if we have Saturn squaring from above or Saturn the 8th opposing the second, then that would be, we can think of it as Saturn sort of criticizing or scrutinizing or gazing harshly upon this topic and harming it and leading to worse financial outcomes.
Absolutely. So number 2, we need to delineate the planet in a sign and in a house, along with the planet's condition. So here we're focusing on the planet.
Yeah. In this case, you have to see the nature of the planet, if it's already naturally benefic or naturally malefic, because it's going to tend to do one thing or the other naturally. But you also have to see if it's well placed. If it's well placed, the challenges proposed by that malefic are going to be constructive, but they're still going to be experienced as more difficult life experiences or challenging. Even if they are inviting. If you have a prominent malefic chart and downgraded, let's say, benefics, maybe you are someone who is very prone to feeling inspired when you're in a tough spot, you know, or to turn your life around when those challenges come up and things like that. So this kind of evaluation.
Or like a challenge that seems like unsurmountable, but leads to like a good thing, and you're willing to go through the challenge. It's not like, oh my God, like this is like some traumatic, poverty-stricken situation. No, it might be just like an extreme amount of challenging school or something that ultimately leads to your betterment.
Yep.
When it's your malefic of sect, that would be the experience overall, for instance, as you're saying, like the person is willing to take on the responsibility that the malefic proposes in order to achieve certain heights or certain ranks or a certain goal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I think this is from chapter 79, this part. And so when she talks about the condition of the planet, I really like the way that she put it in that chapter, which is that she gives the example of Venus in Gemini in the 8th from one of the example charts. And so she says, she has a very specific way of breaking it down in the delineation she comes up with, is something like Venus in Gemini in the 8th is like an outgoing, charming, sociable style of relating. So this is how the person will bring relationships into their life. It is bound up in 8th house topics. So it will be related to other people's money, debts, inheritances, that kind of a thing. And then the condition is how well is that planet going to be able to provide the best of its outcomes. And in that chart, there's like an opposition from Saturn or something, or maybe it's enclosed. And so it's not able to give those good outcomes. And so we see, death of spouses and financial entanglements and like troubles with inheritances and this kind of thing. So Venus is like not able to provide the good outcome based on her position.
Totally. And so I guess all of this, we're talking about quote unquote mitigations and like conditions, or you could see them as like significations or modifications to the planet. So all of those, terms just technically are what we're, just for y'all's, terminology.
Right. And maybe just a last quick point on that is that like, we think of the planet in the house and sign, you make a statement of like what that is. And then you have like other, like also saying modifications such as witnessing by benefics and malefics, sect, speed, all of these kinds of things that will say like, will this be accomplished or not? In what manner will it be accomplished? Will it be fast or slow? Will it be disrupted by certain things? And so on and so forth.
Exactly. So and make sure, and as you get more complicated with it, you're going to look at like all kinds of potential mitigations, or, like let's say you have a perfectly placed planet, but you're getting a strong degree-based ray cast from a Saturn square or something like this. Then you're going to be like, oh, it's really great, but there's this constant wall that it's hitting or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Coming from this other challenge in life, So you're going to get some of that like besiegement or enclosure or, all kinds of like little things that you have to look for to planetary condition as you go. Okay, so number 3, planets and their house rulership. So again, this is focused on the planet. You guys want to comment on that?
So basically what she's saying here is that a planet will rule always either 1 or 2 houses. And so like, let's say we have a planet in the 10th ruling the 5th, then we will have that planet being responsible as it's placed in the 10th, using those resources for the topic of children. And so this is going to be reiterated somewhat in points 4 through 6. Is that the condition of that planet will determine in some way the condition of the topics that it's responsible for.
Exactly. So it's like when you're determining a planet and then you finally got it like locked down, like how the planet is doing, then you can just go like, okay, where its houses, and you can kind of see that whatever condition you've outcomed, whatever conclusion you come to, you can then look to those houses and see it, that sort of spreading a bit.
Yeah.
And
go ahead, dude.
I was going to say, you have to look at the condition. I think this ties nicely to the next step, and I think we could tie them together. Can I read the fourth? Mm-hmm. So the 4th topic is the planet's domicile lord. And I wanted to mention them together because you can't really tell if the planet is not in its own home, obviously, how, even if it's in bad condition, how its outcome is going to go without looking at its lord as well. For let's say if you have a planet in exile in a house and its lord is very well placed, maybe you get some difficulty at first, but later on you learn how to deal with that debilitated planet, and it's a source of good things for you in the long term. You learn how to use it for your advantage, which is also integrated into what she says later. You're going to see how. But just that thing of looking at the planet in the house and its condition. Also, I wanted to mention the motivation for the planet within a house comes from the houses that it rules. So what do we mean by that? If you have, for instance, Venus transiting Capricorn, which is Saturn's house, or Saturn's, responsibility to take care of. When Venus needs to perform things by transit in that sign, she will look to Saturn to see what Saturn is doing and if he can provide to her an understanding of what's going on here to work best. Saturn has the responsibility to give Venus those attributes so she can manifest well or not her significations in that.
The motivation for Venus could be to take care of her 2 temples.
Yes.
Yes. So then you're saying, okay, Saturn, what do I have for tools and resources here? Because I have to report back to the 5th and the whatever, like whatever.
I didn't quite conclude, but when I was thinking that too, but when I was thinking more in the sense that Saturn would be responsible for Venus. So Saturn would be motivated to act in whatever house it would occupy in your chart, according to what Venus is demanding from it by being in its house. I, for instance, have a bunch of planets in Aquarius and Capricorn, so a bunch of planets require a lot of stuff from my Saturn. Not all of them can see Saturn, so you'll have different results based on that.
Yeah.
And I think a good way, this is also like 3 and 4, and number 4, like David said, is the planet's domicile lord, is that you can have a planet that is, let's say it's in really good condition. It's like Mars in Scorpio in the 10th. It's like ready to, be a famous general or something. Or maybe not Mars in Scorpio, Mars in Leo, let's say, in the 10th. It's ready to be like a famous conquering general. But the sun is in the 12th, where the sun is averse to Mars. Mars is like strong, ready to go, ready to fight, ready to do its thing. But the resources at its disposal given to it by the sun are not there. So it would be, a reduced level of that. It would be someone who has these really good Martian qualities, but doesn't get the recognition for them, doesn't have a space.
You meant Mars in Leo?
Mars, let's say Mars in the 10th in Leo, right? Okay. So it's like in a strong position. It's maybe not in the best sign ever, but it's like prominent in the chart. And let's say the sun is averse to it, or the sun's in the 12th, something like that. We would have a condition where it's like an absentee landlord, or the house that it's in is kind of a wreck because its host is not well placed. And then we can say the opposite of that would be Mars is with the sun in Leo. Mars is strong in this case because it's in the 10th house and it's with a strong host. So it will have an opportunity to realize its best outcomes.
Yeah, being received by the host.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great example, because that can't be sort of undervalued in your interpretation, because like my ascendant lord is doing really pretty well and but its lord is not. And you do see that. You really do see it. So you just have to make sure that you're kind of doing all the steps. And that's what this integration is all about. So, don't get too excited or too detrimented by your first sort of evaluations of something being like either really good or really bad, because those extra steps do make a difference in how the native perceives their life, as well as what actually can be accomplished for them.
And we are kind of touching on as well on the topics 5 and 6 already, the outcome of a house topic, which is a focus on the house, as well as the lord of the house. And we have the planet's domicile lord and the lord of the house kind of being the same when you have when you're trying to judge the same house that contains a planet or something. But she separates here just for the sake of knowing what to do when you have empty houses.
Yeah, exactly. So that is important as well. And it's going to go the same way as we said. Like if there's an empty house, you have to look to the Lord and the Lord of it to see like how the resources or the topic is going to develop. So that would be number 5, the outcome of a house topic, which we have a video on. And then number 6, the Lord of the house. So you're focusing on, again, the house itself, which I think we covered in this little example.
Yeah. If I could reiterate just a little bit, is that the point with this like house lord stuff is we can imagine like literally like a landlord, or like if you're a kid and it's your parent, like the person who's responsible for the house, if it's not you, really matters for what is going to be able to be done in that house, regardless of the original condition of the planet. So like I said,
like if you think about like a strict parent being like, my house, my rules, and it's like you can like do like whatever.
And it's like the difference between having a natural talent for something like Mars in Leo in the 10th wood, and having circumstances like growing up in wealth, growing up the son of another general or something like that, and having all these opportunities to exercise these Martian things, and then not having those opportunities despite having the talent. You just have very different outcomes.
Right. You could be talented at something and you don't have the support to get that talent across. And or you could be very talented and have things actually actively working against your talent to suppress it. So great point.
That will depend and also on the nature of the planets that are ruling the house. If
Yep.
you have a malefic, it might take a while in your life. Even if it's well placed, it might be delayed just because of the
Mhm.
nature of malefics themselves. Well, if it's a benefic, it might be quicker. It might happen from the go, from the word go. Oh, Britney Spears, since 2 years old, she was already tap dancing or whatever,
Right. Yep.
like that.
And circumstances conspired to give her,
The
push
exalted
up into
position
eminence
of
versus the millions and millions of kids who are really good dancers who end up not being famous, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Either they can't afford tap shoes, the school won't have them, the parents think tap dancing is stupid. Like,
yeah, and her parents were not rich, but
Yeah.
they really gave it importance because they saw the potential and they exalted the potential in her.
Yeah, exactly.
To allow circumstance to flourish that way.
exactly. Okay, so I don't know if this might be belaboring some of our points, but I thought it was important for us to go a little bit deeper again in conclusion, because we are concluding part 8. So she goes on to give us a template for interpretation. And I asked maybe if David and Matt would want to read a little bit more straightforward from the book, because I love, again, the way Demetra puts it, kind of like she did in the first part of the opening. So I hope it's not too much for y'all to belabor this point and for the audience, but I like kind of reading from her to close out this portion.
Yeah, I wanted to read from 937 in the book, the page 937, because the final delineations of planets and houses, as Elsa was saying, is very well summarized in these 2 last paragraphs. And I quote, "The complete interpretation of a planet in a house incorporates how effectively the planet brings forth its own significations based upon its nature, sign, and condition. The topics of the house it occupies, the topics of the house it rules, or the houses it rules, and its relationship to its domicile lord." Those are the enumerated points that she gives for delineating the outcome of a planet in a house. And then for the house, the following last paragraph says, "The complete interpretation of a house topic outcome incorporates the nature and condition of the house, the impact of the planets that reside in the house, and the lord of the house. The better the condition of a house's resident planets and lord, the better the outcome of the house topics for the native." So this summarizes everything that we were saying prior, just to wrap it up.
All right, yeah, thank you, David. So then in the place of the interpretation, Demetra says, like, to kind of conclude, she says, "Remember the stable foundation of reason facilitates the accuracy of the divinely inspired aspect of astrology." So again, that kind of brings us back around to however I put it in the beginning of, like, going through the filters creates an oracular space. And I think that's really important to the type of astrology that we do, and to remember that it's not like science, like it has to be exactly this way and it's super firm. But at the same time, it's very living and very oracular, but there are ways in order to get into that space. And you can think of it almost like a ritualistic process of really working the steps in order to get to this space that opens up. So I love the way that she puts that. So using reason essentially in order to facilitate this divinely inspired space of astrology, which is what a lot of people, love about astrology, is that aspect of astrology.
Yeah, and I think an idea that David hinted at earlier, and just a reiteration of that, and something that Schmidt talks about, is that there is kind of the experiential portion of like an oracular experience, and then there's the cognitive ability to communicate that. And so we can have this, like Demetra says, this divinely inspired experience of astrology. And I think every astrologer has had that when they know that a transit is coming up, or they know that a Time Lord period is coming up, and something happens, and there's this like moment of like understanding that this is what astrology is all about. And then there's the ability to communicate that to someone, which are 2 completely different things. And so you can have people who are like way tapped in but cannot communicate it, and you have people who can elaborate and elaborate and elaborate but do not have that sort of living experience portion of it. And so we take these rules and these procedures to help us communicate this lived experience.
And the lived experience, it comes from someone else also allowing us to see this knowledge the way it is, because it is much deeper than you can just perceive with your eye. As Met said, you can have a lived experience, but you might not call it, you might not have a tool to help you, as Matt was saying, direct the way you relate to it, right? So you're just subject to the experience in a way. In this way, again, we can mediate the experience and the person trying to reach that level of experience. We can be catalyzers for the experience with the gods, basically.
Yeah,
so we are in a way also
sorry.
doing kind of priestly work here.
Yeah, it's about articulation and vocabulary, essentially, is what this is.
And you know how she says, like, the gods who live inside us as like centers of consciousness, right? So it's not only that we're taking them through the filters and through the procedures, but we're, as astrologers, mediating between this planetary godship and this sort of like space that we live in, which is very, I'm sure you guys are familiar, like astrology good, right? Where like something happens and you're like, oh my God, like that happened too literal, right? Like too weird, too literal. And so it's like, we've got that piece where we live in this mundane space where you can see these very literal ways in which the planet moves, but it's also bringing ourselves in accordance with that. Demetra puts it as this center of consciousness that leads or drives the personality towards self-realization. So there's all these aspects being woven in, which obviously Hellenistic astrology, or Demetra in her book, really puts together well. Like, I love that she really captures those different spaces and how to go about them, and she's just a really great guide for that process for us. So
yeah, I really like that you brought up the astrologer good. Just like a quick story is, for myself and for actually two friends of mine, I've predicted car crashes. And for me, I got in a car accident like about a year and a half ago. Immediately I'm looking like an idiot on the side of the road, like pulled out my phone, and I'm just like, oh my God, like this is totally a car crash chart. And then for two of my friends, I did the same thing, and they were on the side of the road, like texting me like, oh my God, I cannot believe you predicted this car crash. And I think both times I was like, be careful while traveling, accidents while traveling, that kind of a thing.
It's funny,
but it takes this experience and imbues it with something, it elevates.
And you become, when you start studying this material in depth, you become obsessed with with trying to integrate it, because you just want to. It's amazing to be able to see it. Like this one time I was sleeping, my bed I lived in an apartment building. So in the street right in front of me, there was this car crash where the guy just hit a light post or another car. I don't quite remember. And it just flipped over. The car flipped over completely, and the guy was like in the car. And the police had to come in and rescue him. I think he was drunk. But the moment the car crashed, I woke up immediately. I looked out the window. I saw a car flipped. I did not think of calling the service line to pull up with my phone. I went immediately to the app, to the chart app, and I was like, "What's the chart?" And then I took a screenshot and then I posted it on Instagram. But I did not call the emergency service.
Yeah.
We are terrible people. We are terrible.
But that's also because there was a police car
right
turning right around the corner a few seconds afterwards. So my first reaction was actually looking at the chart first, but I immediately saw a police car turning the corner. So I proceeded to not call the emergency services.
But yeah, and I think just final point on that is that a lot of times the things that really excite me about astrology are the most mundane possible events. Like, to me, a very little of it is about this like really high like spiritual evolution. Like, so much of it is predicting like when I'll get a little extra money, or when my dog will get hurt, or when I'll injure my shoulder, something like that.
Yeah, and on that, like, the mundane is really sweet to know. And some might ask, like, what's the point of knowing if I'm getting in a car crash if I can't prevent it? And I can't really plan for a car crash. And maybe you could say you could in different ways, but it is ultimately like aligning yourself with the the turning of events or the flow of events. And when you do think about, you could take it as spiritual as you want, but when you get into like planetary magic and things like that, it does actually really, it sounds like all highfalutin, but it's actually like very mundane. It's like, what types of food you're eating? Are they Martian? Are they Venusian? What kind of colors are you wearing? Are they, so it's like, it is very much like, what Demetra talks about is like living through us and in us in a very mundane way, to where we are actually like, and this is, animism to a T, right? So it's just like, we're living with these things that can manifest as mundane, but also can help us live in alignment with like some type of like realized nature about the way that we work and the world around us works. So,
well, nature is magical in itself, so it makes sense that we can use everything around us as oracular objects to learn how to integrate ourselves and adapt to nature. It is having a relationship with nature, and it reminds me of the Christian doctrine that I was taught of loving God above all else and loving the next person as you love yourself. Of this, like the whole tool of astrology and how we do this with these gods as well, how we are intermediating their communication with this world, is also very much making ourselves aware of the cosmos, right? And loving the cosmos above all else, so we can have an understanding that supports our morals and all that, and our ethics.
I love that point, David, because I think a lot about, and Elsa's point too, where it's like, what's the point of predicting things if we can't change anything? And I don't really always think that's the point, but it's more about having a relationship with Venus or with Mercury.
That is the point.
And so it's like, you can think of like, if you're reading a book, or if you're like playing piano, or if you're talking to a friend, like you are having a relationship with Mercury at that moment.
And you're serving and or living out their intentions and or serving them, and both, if you decide to do it intentionally, right? So it's like Demetra says the intention in order to participate in the realization of our own spark of divinity, and that's living in our everyday lives. So, oh my God, you guys, what a good episode. It got a little bit deeper, like more like than we planned, but
I think this deserves your like and a comment and your subscription. So please go ahead. Don't be shy.
And your money. You can join our group too.
Exactly. Join us for the rest of this book on Patreon. I think we have it scheduled to end around the new year or around December. So we still have some of the more complicated parts of the book to go. So like, if you feel totally secure in your understanding of the things we've gone through so far, just going over the houses and the planets and that type of a thing, you can always jump on for the last part of the book where we dive in a little bit deeper. So part 9, it starts with the rulers of the nativity. So it does get a little bit deeper, and I believe we get into things like length of life technique and things like that. So if you guys are interested in some of that kind of thing, you can join us for the last part of this book we go through December. So with that being said, thank you both again for joining today, and thanks all you YouTubers for joining us here, and until next time, ciao.
Bye.
Ia matauka ka bersamayo demikian soba da soba kena